In EBT, there are 4 rules. It's based on 4 rules of neuroscience. Those rules are, it's not us, it's our wiring. Wiring triggers brain states. Brain states tend to get stuck. And the 4th is that we can create new wiring. So let's go back to number 1. The first is, let's say that you get triggered. All of a sudden, you know you're overreacting. You feel very stressed out. It's not really us. It's not our consciousness, but it's a wire. It's a whacked out wire that got triggered. And when we know that it's really not about all of us, it's just about that little wire, then we can begin to use that information to feel better, to do something productive and effective. So the first rule is that when you get stressed out, the first thing you do is know that it's just a wire, it's not you. So when we're stressed, what happens every moment of every day is we get triggered to move through stress. That's called a joy wire or a homeostatic wire. Or we get triggered to go into stress, so we go down into a stress state. So all of the wires we have are either wires that trigger well-being and joy, or wires that trigger one form of stress or another. So when a wire gets triggered, we actually lead to rule number 2, which is we go into a brain state. The brain is organized to use the different areas of the brain differently based on how much stress we're under. So the more stress we're under, the more we're going to move to using the primitive parts of our brain because they react more quickly. You know, when you touch the stove, you move away from it because you're using the primitive areas of your brain to quickly get your hand away from the heat. The top part of the brain, the neocortex, is slower. So when there's stress, we move to those more primitive areas. They're quicker, but they're not necessarily as accurate. So there are actually 5 brain states. The first one is feeling a lot of joy and well-being, all the way down to a brain state of 5, where we're completely stressed out. You'll be learning more about those brain states as we move along. The reason the brain states are so important is because they're universal. So everyone on the planet has 5 brain states, and in those states there's very predictable things that occur. And so if you know what your brain state is, you know what to expect of yourself, and also you know what tool to use to feel better. Because in each brain state, the brain is operating differently, so it will need a different pathway through the brain to feel better. So the third rule is that these brain states tend to get stuck. You know how that is, that if you look around you, you notice that some people are sort of stuck in stress, where it feels natural and normal to be stressed out, and then they surround themselves with other people who are stressed out too. The only problem is that in that state of stress, that's where 80% of health problems come. Most human suffering and addiction comes from being stuck in that state of stress. The good news is, just the way our brain can get familiar with being stressed and even think that being stressed is safe, our brain can also learn that the safe place, the home base emotionally, is actually feeling great. So more toward the brain state of 1 instead of the brain states of 4 or 5 where we're overwhelmed with stress. The 4th rule is that we can create new wiring. So just the way that wiring that triggered us to go into a brain state that got stuck in stress can occur, we can go back and put our effort toward rewiring the brain so that we initially move through stress back to joy more easily. What we do in EBT is we train the brain to be comfortable being in joy, to being able to bounce back to joy and spend less time in stress. So we're breaking the circuits or the wires that trigger stress, and we're building the wires that create joy. Those are the 4 rules of EBT.